All right. Thanks everyone for being here today, and welcome to this webinar regarding the request for proposals fiber marketing construction partner that's a part of the High Speed Nevada initiative in phase 2. My name is Brian Mitchell. I'm the director at OSIT, the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology that's sponsoring this project. And I appreciate everyone being here, and we'll go ahead and go through these slides. The agenda for the meeting today, we'll talk a little bit about the vision for High Speed Nevada, and then move to the specific goals of this RFP. I'll talk a little bit about a couple of changes to the RFP that you'll be seeing since we posted. We'll talk then about the route and give an overview of the route. We'll also talk a little bit about funding and how this project is being funded, some of the technical specifications and the scope of work. Then I'll talk a little bit about the application submission process, speak about some tips and tricks when it comes to submitting your RFP. Or your response to the RFP. And we'll talk about the scoring criteria and some other considerations, and then wrap it up with some next steps. One thing to note is we will not be answering any questions on this webinar today. And I'll be talking a little bit about the question and answer process when we get to that point in the slides. You're welcome to submit, either ask questions and we will write them down, or what we would prefer is for you to submit your questions in writing, and then they will all be answered all at once. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the High Speed Nevada initiative is Nevada's initiative for universal access, universal connectivity. Our goal is that every Nevadan has access to a high-speed internet connection that is affordable and reliable and scalable. We know that there's a significant amount of coordination and partnerships throughout the state that will be needed to make that happen. We also know that we'll need to have an efficient use of different funding sources, as no one single funding source will be able to meet the needs that we have for Nevadans. Finally, this initiative is focusing on making long-term investments that'll benefit Nevadans for the next generation. And so that's how we've approached this particular project, is through that lens of how can we make a long-term investment that will ensure that Nevadans are connected, for the foreseeable future. So with that kind of background on this particular initiative, let me move into some of the changes to the RFP that we've made since the RFP was posted. The largest change is that we are now partnering with state purchasing who will be helping us with this solicitation. And so so the RFP is the official process is being moved from the OSIT website to the state purchasing website. So all of the we'll post information on the OSIT website, but the processes for asking questions and the process for submitting your application have been and will be moved to the state purchasing website. For those of you that aren't familiar with state purchasing, purchasing uses a program called Nevada ePro, and all vendors are required to register with Nevada ePro in order to view the solicitations, as well as make your put in your bids. And so if you go to the website below, purchasing.nv.gov, you'll find the link to Nevada ePro down there at the bottom. Once you click there, there are two different links that I'll highlight here for you. So the first one is the Nevada ePro vendor registration. This is where you will register to receive all of the bid notices, to provide your bid responses, and otherwise ask questions and otherwise do business with the state. So registering is a requirement. There's no other way to submit a bid other than through the ePro vendor system. The second thing that you'll have to do in order to submit a bid is register with the state controller's office and get a vendor ID. So there's two different, I guess, vendor registration processes, and it's a little confusing sometimes, where you'll get an ePro vendor number, and then you'll also get a vendor number from the state controller's office. So the ePro vendor number is a number that the state purchasing office assigns to you that allows you to bid on projects. For winning vendors, in order for the state to pay you, you will need to have registered with the state controller's office and have received a vendor ID. Part of the process of getting a vendor ID is having a state business license, and that is done through the Secretary of State's office. So make sure that prior to, in addition to registering for ePro, the link is there to the controller's office, which has all of the information about registering as a vendor. We require that you have a state vendor ID number with the controller's office in order to submit your bid. So I realize there's a lot of information there, and a lot of maybe confusing terminology possibly around vendor registration. So the good news is that the state controller's office has a help desk whose number you can see there, and/or an email address where you can ask questions about registration. So this solicitation for the middle mile will be removed from the OSIT website and placed on the Nevada ePro website, and that's where you'll find all of the information moving forward. Again, this is where you submit your bid response, this is where you ask your questions, and this is where you receive your information. When it comes to questions, all of the question and answer that we're going to do will be through a common FAQ. So we would prefer to get all questions in writing. All the questions will go through ePro and will go to state purchasing, who will work with my office in order to provide the responses. And then the responses to all questions will then be posted on the OSIT website, or excuse me, on the state purchasing website. And all vendors will get a copy of the responses to the questions. And that way everyone is seeing exactly which questions are asked, and also what the answers to those questions are. All right, next I want to move into and talk a little bit about the route for this particular project. So the state, when we began the process at OSIT of evaluating our needs and the barriers to connectivity in communities around the state, one of the things that we found is that there was a lack of affordable upstream bandwidth options for last mile providers in the more rural and remote parts of the state, and that the cost of upstream bandwidth in places where it did exist, and the lack of upstream bandwidth in places where it didn't exist, was a barrier to serving unserved markets or underserved markets. So the state undertook a planning process, and with available funds, decided that we wanted to create the Nevada Middle Mile Network, which you see depicted on the screen. This middle mile network will connect the state from Reno to Las Vegas, and will pass through many of the unserved and underserved locations in the state. You'll notice that there's two different colors of lines on the map, and I'll get into that right here. So these projects are funded by three different funding sources. And what it comes down to is that this project, while the goal is to have a single statewide middle mile network, these projects are being funded, or the different segments are funded by different funding sources. So on the left, the green route is the I-80 route, and that is being funded by the Capital Projects Fund. And the state received an allocation from the Capital Projects Fund, which is funded as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act. And so the state received approval from U.S. Treasury to use a portion of its Capital Projects Fund to construct middle mile along the I-80 route. Separately, the state applied for a competitive grant from the NTIA through their Enabling Middle Mile Infrastructure Program. This was a $1 billion program, and the state received was very fortunate to have received one of the grants from that project. The state will also be contributing matching funds to these projects. So while ultimately we want a single contiguous middle mile network, in reality, the winning bidder and OSIT will work together to treat these almost as two different projects. So there are two different funding sources for the projects, or two different primary federal funding sources for the projects, and these funding sources will bidders will need to come up with two different budgets for each segment that fall within the dollar amounts that OSIT has available for each, and vendors will also need to work with OSIT to comply with both the Treasury requirements and the NTIA requirements as applicable on these routes. So now I want to get into some of the technical specifications and technical details of this project, and walk you through what we've laid out in the RFP, but also walk you through what our philosophy is and how we want to work with the winning bidder in terms of building the network. And so I've asked Joe Fredoso, who is a contractor with the state, to come and hop on and help me explain some of these parts. Joe?
Thanks, Brian. And thanks everyone for attending today. So I'm sure everyone on the call has gotten a chance to peruse in great detail the RFP. My role today is to go over some of the technical specifications in the RFP. The route descriptions are in the RFP. The Eastern Nevada Middle Mile starts at the Decatur Avenue Switch Facility and terminates at the DOT Yard, the Wells and Interconnect Point, and traverses up 93 proper, as you've seen on the map. So through Pioche Caliente, up to the intersection with US 50, through Ely, and then into Wells. And then the I-80 route starts at the Utah-Nevada border in West Wendover, goes on both sides of the street on the Virginia Street exit of I-80, to 200 South Virginia Street, goes both directions up and down the street to have bi-directional feed into the 200 South Virginia Street, and then continues back on I-80 to the California border. In those areas, obviously we're predominantly almost 100%, if not 100%, in the Nevada DOT right of way. We've coordinated closely with DOT. Their normal fiber build support will be available for this project. They will have personnel dedicated to this and project management personnel from DOT, in addition to the OSIT fiber team that will be supporting the winning vendor in the build. The fiber description is in the RFP, but one note is to note that there are 2 6-way conduits that will be installed. One will be under the sole control of the state for its future use, and then the other will be for marketing commercial services. Some of the scope of work requirements that we had in this is that obviously we want this to be a buried route. And we also want the vendor to give us some detail on the construction side of this that's outlined, what your timeline looks like, you know, the environmental review process, and if we are required to get a FONSI, which we expect, we don't expect a categorical exclusion, how long we think that that FONSI process will take. And then obviously some details on the build, a detailed construction timeline on the build. We also are very focused on the marketing side of this program. We want frequent interconnects along this route in the population centers that exist along the route. As you all know, if you look at the I-80 route today, it is a true long haul route with add drop facilities placed for convenience, 60 miles or so apart. So a lot of those add drop facilities on the existing I-80 route are in very rural and remote areas. We would like this network as much as possible to have add drop facilities in the population centers along the route so that last mile providers along the route can access services from the winning vendor and from other vendors who lease dark fiber on the network. We want to understand how you're going to market lit services and dark fiber to and interduct to third-party providers. This is an open access network. And again, the construction vendor will also be responsible, or the construction oversight vendor will also be responsible for marketing these services. The state is requesting a revenue share of those services to help with the upkeep and upgrade of the state network long term. But we also want to understand how you're going to aggressively market to third-party providers. As Brian said in the introduction, we gathered over a dozen letters of support from small to mid-sized last mile providers who serve markets along both routes and said reliability and cost in the middle mile for backhaul and access were significant issues that deterred them from deploying last mile service in those markets along US 93 and Interstate 80. And we really want to know how you're going to address that, how your marketing plan is going to address that. Again, we look for commission and revenue on this. Obviously, we're funding the costs of the build through the 2 grants and the state of Nevada match. Again, our main goal are the goals and focus of the High Speed Nevada initiative, which is to get every Nevadan a scalable and affordable broadband connection. So while we want to look at the commission and revenue structure, we're also going to be very attuned to how you're going to market services and where your facilities are to interconnect with the network. We will have some ongoing state interface. We'll set goals for interconnection with last mile providers, probably on a quarterly basis to start, and look at how we're progressing against those marketing goals because we really want this network to be used. And again, our goal here is to enable last mile providers to more efficiently deploy their networks in unserved and underserved areas along the route, and to really address with the remaining BEAD funds that they can apply for how they're going to use this network. So we really want to make sure that we are building this network in tune with unserved and underserved areas, residential areas along the routes, and really enabling last mile providers who are interested in serving those areas to deploy efficiently and make good use of the BEAD funds that the state has been allocated. Again, as Brian said, this is part of an overall strategy. We knew we had to address backhaul and access in Nevada. We've went out and secured the funding to do that. Now we need a partner to help us implement this part of the vision, which is really a key to unlocking the potential of the BEAD funds that we've received and serving unserved and underserved areas along the routes. Brian, I don't know if you have anything you want me to add to that.
No, Joe, thanks. That was perfect. Great overview of kind of the technical portions of the RFP, and I think we've outlined in great detail in the RFP the specifics of what we're looking for. And certainly, if you have questions about that, please put those questions in writing, and we'll be happy to answer them. Again, I think for those of you that joined a few minutes late, the application submission process will be handled through Nevada ePro, and registration with the state purchasing office is required in order to submit a bid, as well as view all of the bid materials and ask questions. So all the questions will be directed to state purchasing, who will work with us to provide the answers. And so with regard to this project, again, as Joe said, what we're looking for is a single vendor that will be responsible for the entire construction process, including environmental, engineering and design, and then will be the maintenance and the operations and the marketing partner for the state moving forward for this network. So I wanted to just provide a couple of tips when it comes to submitting your bids and making your responses. We have in the response category of the RFP, we've outlined a number of different questions divided up into different sections. I think while this may sound either elementary or simple, I would encourage you to answer every question that's asked, and not leave any questions blank. The second tip is that if you restate the question and then provide your response under that question, it will make it a lot easier for reviewers to understand what your response is to that particular part of the RFP and score your application. If you submit your response as one large paragraph, then it can be very difficult for the RFP reviewers to review and score your application. So would really encourage you to just take the RFP as a template and then provide responses underneath each question. Another tip is to provide an appropriate level of detail. So oftentimes, we've seen in the past, very short answers to some questions where we were looking for a pretty significant strategy or articulation of a plan. So, again, we need to be able to understand what your proposal is and what you're seeking to do in all aspects of this RFP. And the more detail you can provide, the better we're able to understand. Having said that, we don't need 500-page applications either. So that there needs to be a balance between providing enough detail without having an application that's too large. The final one is to ensure that your budget numbers are correct. And please keep in mind, that we will require the budget numbers to come in and be aligned to the different funding sources. So, and you'll need to stay within the budget for each funding source, so that it won't be possible to have one funding source contribute toward the construction of a route that's being funded by another funding source. I wanted to talk a little bit about the scoring criteria and how we'll we will evaluate applications. So in very broadly, these are the categories of these scoring criteria are aligned to the categories of questions that I talked about earlier, and we'll be evaluating bids on the applicant's experience doing similar projects. So does the applicant have the ability, like the past prior experience, overseeing a construction project of similar size? Do they bring to the table the partners that have the right experience in Nevada or in similar locations, with things like environmental and constructing in the kind of terrain that you experience in Nevada. And then does the applicant have experience with the post-construction operation, maintenance, and marketing of the route, and operating a long-haul route? And so while there may be applicants that have a lot of great experience, we also want to understand, does the applicant have the capacity in order to fulfill this project and to see it completed? So we'll ask for an articulation of, do you have the bandwidth, so to speak, in order to take on this project in addition to the other projects and the other the other things that your company is doing. So we want to make sure that not only do you have the experience, but also do you have the ability and the capacity and the bandwidth in order to take this project on and treat it as a priority and see it through to completion. The largest individual scoring category is the applicant's approach to the construction and the marketing. So this is where you'll get into the details of how you'll do the construction and then how you will approach the marketing. So a lot of detail here about how basically this is how you're going to tell us how you're going to do the work that's involved in the RFP. Labor and workforce considerations are important to the state, and so this is where you will talk a little bit about compliance with federal labor laws and as well as state labor laws, and then demonstrate that you have the access to the workforce to carry this project out. We're also very interested in partnerships for workforce development and partnering with you to ensure that we can create a pipeline for highly skilled workers that can come in and work for you in order to get the project done. So please spend some time talking about workforce development in your applications. And then the final criteria is related to the commission structure that you propose, and it adds up to 100 points. So a few other considerations that I just wanted to mention. Again, you'll need to submit 2 different budgets, one for the I-80 route and then one for the US 93 route. We've provided the dollar amounts and the budget amounts that were submitted, or the budgets that we submitted to our federal partners, and for your reference, and so that's what we're going to be required to abide by, so those dollar amounts, we need to stay within those dollar amounts. On the reporting and the compliance side, the winning vendor will need to comply both with Treasury and NTIA rules. OSIT will provide assistance on the fiscal side, and we'll work with your fiscal teams on the compliance for both Treasury and NTIA, and we'll be reporting separately to each entity on the progress of the route and on the progress of the construction and the expenditures and reimbursements. This will be a reimbursement grant, and or project, or you'll be paid by reimbursement, and those reimbursements will be done via milestones. Milestone payments. And so we will, be open to working with you to determine milestones along the way, and then reimburse along the way for milestones. One thing that we wanted to highlight that will be added to the RFP in more detail is that Nevada prevailing wage will be required for this project. And so that is something to consider in your budgets. And then finally, we consider bidders in the spirit of both compliance with 2 CFR 200, as well as ensuring that groups of Nevadans who have been historically marginalized and or have not had the opportunities of others, that they will, that in your response you discuss how you will reach out to, do outreach, and where possible, work with qualified minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and labor area surplus firms. All right. Final slide that we have here today is just an overview again of the timeline today. This is the timeline that is in the RFP. Today is August 31st, and we're doing the webinar. There's a deadline to submit or to register through Nevada ePro. The deadline for questions is September 28th. And again, we will do our best as questions come in to answer them as quickly as possible, so that you can continue to put together your responses to this RFP. The proposals are due on October 16th, and we expect to have the evaluations completed by sometime in November. If OSIT decides to do interviews with finalist firms, we will plan to conduct those in mid-November. And we will reach out to the firms that, if we decide to do interviews, we'll reach out to those firms to schedule those. And then the hope would be then or the plan is to select a winning bidder in the November to December timeline. So with that, that is the conclusion of the prepared presentation that we have today on this project. Again, I would encourage you to ask your questions, to register, and then ask your questions through Nevada ePro. And that information will be posted on Nevada ePro either today or tomorrow. With that, I'm happy to, if anyone has a question here that they'd like to ask that we can write down, I'm happy to do that. But we won't be answering any questions today. If not, then that's the conclusion, and appreciate everyone being here today and for the interest in this project. We're really excited about it.
Hey, Brian. This is Brian Hernandez from Zayo. How are you?
Well, thanks.
Question to jot down is, how did you determine the budgets for each product? Each route? Was it, this is the amount of funding we received through the grants, or were there feasibilities done to solidify the cost for the construction of the routes, and then you went and applied for those funds through the grants? And the driver for the question is, if you're familiar with Zayo, building long haul or middle mile is what we do. We're probably the only player here that does this throughout all of North America. And to achieve cost certainty for these routes takes a good amount of time to run through a feasibility study. And just based on your dates there, I don't think it's possible to achieve that level of cost certainty if there is no flexibility for overruns or to recoup costs during the implementation of the project.
Thanks, Brian. I've noted that question and kind of the rationale behind the question. We'll provide a thorough answer in writing here very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other burning questions you want us to take down and get answered right away?
I would add one more. This is Brian again. What is the expectation on the project? So is your expectation that whoever is the design build entity that's going to build this route do this and project manages at cost? Or will there be ability for whoever is granted this project to allocate, costs for project management if it's within the budget provided for each route?
So just to make sure I've got your question right, for the design build, you're asking if you should build the budget at cost or whether you can allocate costs to project management?
Correct. So as it stands now, there's a budget and whoever is the awardee is expected to go build this. But building it would for simplicity to say I got quote from a construction vendor. They said it's going to cost X amount of dollars. When we're submitting invoices for reimbursement, do we have the ability to add a project management fee on top of those invoices?
Okay, got it. One question I can answer is that the recording for this webinar as well as the slides will be available on ePro within the next week or so.
I just had one question, Warren King here, consultant. You had mentioned, I think maybe in the second slide, about a revenue share with the state on the circuit. And if you don't have to obviously detail that here, but if you guys do have some details more that you could send on that, that would be appreciated.
Yep. Happy to provide some more details on the revenue share. Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, for those of you that have already submitted questions, we'll be rolling those over and answering them through through ePro. And and again, in any other future questions, we will answer them there. I've been told by state purchasing that this RFP should be up on ePro by the end of the week, and so when you register, maybe just give it another day or two for it to show up. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.